Welcome to episode number 236, where I'm speaking with Durga Leela about her Yoga of Recovery program, which integrates the wisdom of Yoga and Ayurveda with modern recovery tools, including the principles of the 12-step programs. We also talk about Durga's own journey with addiction and recovery and how she's helping people navigate this journey of recovery today. So please stay tuned. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening. And now here's a new episode. Imagine studying Ayurveda in the elements on a mountaintop campus on the central coast of California, amidst the redwoods overlooking Monterey Bay. This is where Mount Madonna Institute is located. MMI is a regionally accredited institution whose programs are recognized by NAMA. They offer the Ayurvedic Health Counselor and Ayurvedic Practitioner programs, as well as the unique WASC accredited Master of Arts in Ayurveda. Their community of students meet monthly on the mountaintop with complimentary online sessions held weekly. Students dive deeply into Ayurvedic medicine, and the study of classical yoga and Sanskrit round out the curriculum. MMI also offers an Ayurvedic yoga therapy program, which is approved by both NAMA and IAYT. Looking where to begin? Well, look no further. Mount Madonna Institute. Visit them online and see what they have to offer, and you'll find that link in the show notes. Hello and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today I'm very happy to welcome Durga Leela. Durga is a person in long-term recovery, a certified Ayurveda practitioner, yoga teacher, and yoga therapist from the UK and now based in the US. She shares yoga as a recovery pathway in several recovery conferences over the last 20 years. She has also served as the director of the Ayurveda programs at the Shivananda Ashram in California since 2003. She is a professional member of the National Ayurvedic Medical Association also. Her latest book, which was published in May 2022, Yoga of Recovery, integrating yoga and Ayurveda with modern recovery tools for addiction. And it represents a complete resource for working with individuals recovering from addiction. Durga, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me here today, Claire. I appreciate you inviting me here today.
Oh, it's lovely. I think this book is so needed, and introducing yoga and Ayurveda into recovery just makes so much sense. So I'd love to start, Durga, with what is the Yoga of Recovery program in general? If you were to explain it to somebody on the street, how would you explain it?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's from the Ayurveda perspective, it's really to allow us an easeful way to embody our recovery. So probably we're aware that if there's a mind problem, we tend to deal with it at the psychological level. Perhaps talk therapy, that's been a long history. And now we come to the 21st century and we understand that there's a much deeper mind-body environment that we're dealing with. So a lot of it is Ayurveda allows us to embody recovery principles, because a lot of the time the body has been left behind in the conversations about how to remedy problems in the mind. And then also there's another part to yoga of recovery, and it all started together, but as we develop it and people come to retreats and online courses, we have like separated it into one of the programs allow people to investigate how the yoga pathways help. So it shows the really reframing the addictive problem and solution according to the yoga pathways, but also to get a perspective from the yoga pathway on our very human condition nature, and then also to offer practices from the different pathways, because what I found as I went out to offer this was that most people equated yoga with the physical yoga practice,
right,
purely limited to asana, and often didn't feel invited into that practice because it looked too physically rigorous for them. So I think that would be a little bit of a summary. So Ayurveda part embodies, and the yoga part expands our understanding to how the different yoga pathways and perspectives and practices just really allow us to take the inherent energy of the human condition and raise the awareness and consciousness around that, rather than externalizing solutions to the likely sensations that we are feeling in this karmic-based life of pain and disappointment and betrayal and trauma and depression.
Very good. Yeah, so it's a real holistic program.
Very much so.
Okay, great. Well, I want to definitely dig deeper, but thank you for that overall summary. And I'd like to go back a little bit, because I know your work is very personal to you. And as we mentioned in your bio, you are yourself in long-term recovery. Can you share a little bit of your journey with us, from how you've gone through your journey with addiction to now helping others navigate this path to recovery?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So
Nice.
I guess my experience with addiction started for me as a child, because it was in my family home. My mother had alcohol use disorder. And so I grew up with really a battle against alcoholism. And in that battle, I developed strong codependency. And I don't think I really understood life outside of a codependent lens. And I do understand, because of my own personal history, how much codependency is at the root of all our addictive problems. You know, it's a relational disorder. So we develop relationships with substances and behaviors and people. And I think we're really seeking the ultimate, which is to love and be loved. But it all gets fragmented and corrupted and darkened and veiled through our loss of connection with who we truly are. So for me, that was part of my story. And to resolve that, I would say that I went out into the world. So I hear your accent, you can hear mine. I left my country and I went to make it in the world. And I thought success would remedy the problem at home.
Right.
So if I could just go out and be successful, you know, get a degree, get a job, have a successful life as we're taught to do, then that would resolve it. And I did that. It was a struggle, but I did it. There was a part of me that was more than capable of doing that. But I think the tragic thing was that it did not resolve the problem at home. Right. And it also did not fill me. You know, I had a lot of the outer trappings of what it meant to be, you know, doing well in the world, but really, there's a recovery term that is the hole in the soul.
Yes. Yeah.
And so everything that I achieved externally didn't really fill that hole in the soul. So there was an increasing level of desperation there for me. And a desperate person will do, you know, desperate measures. And so whatever I had developed these addictive relationships with. I pursued it even more frantically, if you can imagine what that looks like. And to pursue that already with the underlying knowledge, memory, wisdom in my own mind that it really was not the solution. So leading me into recovery was something that was irreversible. And that was my mother passed away. And it was sudden. It was a heart attack, probably brought on by the alcohol use disorder that she suffered with. And that left me spiraling. And I did what is classic in a situation like that. I thought, everything was wrong with my external situation, so I should just change it. And I did a geographic. So I moved from London to Lake Tahoe, so England, in a corporate job, into a small mountain town. Yeah. And I expected to be a different person upon arrival. And then there's that phrase, I think it's Jack Cornfield's book, it's called "Wherever you go, there you are."
Yeah. Troubles follow you.
That was my experience. And so after exactly 9 months of my new life in America, I had no other choice but to walk into a 12-step program and seek help. And from there, I really had, sometimes I'll say I was struck sober. Like I had that if I drink, I really will die. There's no future. There's no fun in any of that behavior that I had. So I became abstinent quite quickly. And then I was left to deal with all the things that led me to the problematic behavior, because, it wasn't just drinking alcohol. I also smoked cigarettes, and layer by layer, I had to uncover some of those things. And that's where it really, it came into my life that I had a spiritual solution. I'd already been a yoga practitioner. So the 12 steps offer like a spiritual solution to what they call a spiritual malady, which I think is lovely because it does line up with the Ayurveda view of disease, that disease is because we forget our true nature as spirit. And I had the physical yoga practice, which I definitely went back to in early recovery, and I relied on it. But really what happened for me was I didn't know what to do with the hours in between. And so I had moved country. I was no longer with my friends or my family or in my job. And I was, experiencing this new lifestyle. And it was very positive, but I wasn't really strongly connected with who I was outside of battling the problems or battling for the success factor in life. So it's very clear, and it becomes the name of the course that I teach, which is, how to embody recovery using Ayurveda. And the course is called Between the Mat and the Meeting, because lots of people call my work yoga for recovery, but it's very clearly yoga of recovery. So the premise is that a lot of the yoga principles, which represent the eternal truth, are also represented in the multiple pathways of recovery. But what was really lacking was that sense of being in body and some kind of idea of a universal behavioral healthcare system. So I could recognize that for 1 hour a day, I was generally okay because I was sitting either in a meeting with my therapist or a recovery pathway meeting. And then I had my hour on the mat, but let's say the other 22 hours in between, there was struggles going on. And I wouldn't call them like diseases. That was one of the issues. I didn't have enough of a disorder to show up at the doctors and start rhyming off my symptoms, because they had to do with my energy, my outlook, my belief system, my sense of self, and all the attendant being able to choose the proper food. It's well known that people coming off of drugs or alcohol usually are very drawn towards high sugar, high caffeine. I smoked a lot of cigarettes. I already had childhood asthma. So, the asthmatic effect and the breathing effect, really kind of made me more sedentary and depressed. So there was a whole load of factors. I often couldn't sleep through the night because I relied so heavily on sugar and caffeine for energy through the day. And so really having disconnected my really body-mind system from a regular healthful way of living, I had to reestablish that. And the funny thing was, I thought about becoming a nutritionist because, and this, I'm sitting here thinking about who I was in those days, and I can see myself just not really knowing what to do with myself. There was so much to be resolved, from the past, and there was so much to be, plotted out and achieved if I was to, live sober and have spirituality in my life. So it was hard to be in the present moment. Right. And anything that I did feel in the present moment, I tried to resolve with either a nap or a cigarette, or I would find myself standing in front of the fridge, and the light of the fridge comes on, and I would be there like, I'm not really looking for food, but it will somehow quell all the anxieties or fears or projections that I'm sitting with. So there was a habit of turning to something sweet. And, the worst thing you can really be in this life is fat for a female. So that was always on my mind and my self of identity, that I couldn't get sober and then just start gaining weight because I started to eat too much. So then sometimes I'd close the fridge and just have another cigarette. And I think I describe quite a bit of what people are generally going through as they face a life sober, because drinking is not the only problem, so we will often tend to have addiction interaction. And in truth, Yoga of Recovery says, if you really look at this problem from the roots, which Ayurveda asks us to do with every disease that we're dealing with, then the real root problems are our attachment, our relationship with food and people. And so the relationship with food and people is really what I was then wrestling with, struggling with in those early days of sobriety. And the solution from my therapist was to offer me an antidepressant. And I did not think that was the solution. So one of the ways that we start Yoga of Recovery is to say this phrase, and this appears in Rolf Gates's book, Meditations from the Mat. And it is, our understanding of our suffering defines the nature of our solution. So having had this spiritual experience, it didn't feel the right thing to medicate away the rumblings of how do you take a spiritual experience and make it sustainable?
Right. Yeah, because essentially you had this disconnection, as you mentioned, from a young age, and it was all very much external output, the job, the career, the distractions. And then you found yourself at a place where with the 12-step program that gave you something to work with, but it still wasn't enough. You still had to do a deeper healing journey into the root of the issues going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the 12-step program certainly helped you in regards to giving you support, but you felt that you wanted to go deeper. There was that, you had that yoga practice there, and you knew that you had a sense that you had to go deeper on that journey. Is that correct to say?
Yes. And really what prompted it was my therapist pushing me towards taking up my career again, because, materially that looked like success. And so there was a question 18 months in recovery why I wasn't, going down to San Francisco perhaps and getting back into my corporate job that paid well. It certainly paid better than the cleaning and bussing tables that I was doing up in Lake Tahoe. But the other advice was feel your feelings. And so every time I felt my feelings about going back to corporate life, there was a tension and a tightness, and it didn't feel good.
Right.
So the conversation in therapy was leading me towards a visit to a psychiatrist, and a 10-minute visit with a psychiatrist, maybe 15, gave me a diagnosis of clinical depression and the prescription of antidepressants. And what I did with my therapist was I said, I think it would be better if I got off of all mind-altering substances before I start taking the pharmaceutical remedy for my mood. And he was surprised because he considered me to be, and we'll use these terms, although they are outdated, clean and sober. You know, I was no longer doing any kind of drugs or no cannabis and no alcohol. But then I pointed out that I was smoking cigarettes, which is one of the deadliest addictions that we have in our society. And it was really thought, like, you don't need to worry about that. And I said, you know, I really think I do. I think it has an effect on how I feel about myself. And I mentioned already I have childhood asthma. So the embarrassing thing, although I really can laugh about it, and it shows the strength of addiction, is I would often take a puff on an inhaler and then light up a cigarette. Right. And that is in recovery. So I needed to change that. And as I say, I was already a yoga practitioner. Now, I'm not the only yoga practitioner that smokes. Some yoga practitioners are very shamed by their own smoking habit. And so what I needed was a rehab for smokers. And I had never gone to a rehab, you know, for alcohol or drugs. And I met a friend and she told me I should go to an ashram. And so I looked it up on the computer, and who I saw was Swami Shivananda. And when I say I was a yoga practitioner, I lived in London, and that's where I practiced yoga, was at the Shivananda Center. And, you know, back in those days, like in let's say the 90s, there wasn't such a choice and range of yoga available publicly.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where I took myself. And I think it's 21 years now abstinent from cigarettes, and that is a true freedom. And then I had my yoga teacher had told me she wanted me to go and hear someone give a talk, and it was on Ayurveda. And so I did, and I was just captivated. And what captivated me was the idea of constitution.
Right.
I think I had always had a very difficult relationship with my own, you know, embodied self. Like almost everywhere I turned, someone told me there was something wrong with it, that I wasn't measuring up. You know, whether it was I needed to get straight A's in school, or I needed to be more religious in church, or I needed to be more polite within the family. There was just, you know, there was this idea that there was always something troublesome about my nature. So the idea of constitution gave me this really strong recognition and a real resonance that I was just part of nature. You know, this 5-element identification that really helped me kind of normalize. And the doshas gave me that idea of, okay, so I have a nature that might tend towards a certain way of being, and you have a nature that has a different tendency, but that doesn't make me wrong and you right, you know.
Exactly.
So that helped a great deal. But when I went back to the ashram, I heard Mark Halpern give a talk on the cause of disease. And the way Ayurveda viewed disease was so groundbreaking, and just like, it was so awakening to me to hear that underneath this spiritual malady that I had been working with in the 12-step recovery pathway, there was this manifestation by how we engage and relate with our world through our senses, and then the crimes against wisdom and what I call the effects of time and environment. That was fundamental. That was my shift moment. And very surprising to me, I said, I have to study this subject. I will take a yoga teacher's training course, and I know what I'm here to do. Like the Dharma question that I'd really been praying about, you know, especially around people wanting to strongly suggest I went back to corporate.
Right.
And here I was with this just uplifting idea that I would study these holistic sciences and yoga, like a spiritual psychology system.
Mm.
And the big thing for me is I went back up to my fellowship group, and a very good friend asked me, how's it going? And I said, I know what I'm going to do with my life now. And he asked, what's that? And I said, I'm going to study Ayurveda. And he said, well, how are you going to make a living? Which is just like a perfect question, because that is at the basis of my longing for security and need to be independent.
Yes.
So spontaneously out my mouth, Colette, I said, I don't know how I'm going to make a living, but I know my living will be improved. And I was surprised to hear it. And he said, that's fantastic. It sounds great. So there really was this feeling of rightness of the decision, even although I would say my intellectual mind would probably not have come up with a, yes, go ahead with this, if I'd written the pros and cons list. You know?
Right. But it resonated with you so deeply. And as for all of us, when we learn Ayurveda and we learn about the constitution types, it's for me, it was the first time in my life that somebody was telling me exactly my constitution type, and it was so logical and resonated so deeply. Is the first time I had a true understanding of myself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And like you, going through life where people are telling you, you're different, or, as a woman, be a little quieter, or don't speak up so much, or, play the role that we're conditioned to. That was the first time I felt like I could stand in my truth.
Yeah, I so agree with you.
Yeah.
And then I have to say, I don't know if we generally bring this in, but what deeply, when the doubts came up, one of the things that I did was I went and had my Vedic astrology chart read. And the conversation was very much like, you're a healer and you're a writer and you have a special subject that you're going to talk about in your work. And so I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing that someone can sit with a piece of paper and relate back to me, like the inner voice that's speaking to me, that was so far against the conditioning and what I was allowed to think who I could be in the world.
Yes.
But that really gave me the permission to pursue something that wasn't always easy and kind of went against the grain. Like, it would be much easier to get a job with, a corporate or a bank. Think life would have been like middle of the road, mediocre and more easy.
Yes.
But the constitutional aspect of Ayurveda and the deeper look at the psyche that the Vedic astrology allowed me was I really recognized myself at this level of purpose and meaning. And I think that is stripped away from us, especially when we witness people who we love self-destruct.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as you said, what you felt true to your core, that this was your dharma, and you were getting lots of messages, like in the Vedic astrology reading, that this was your path.
Yeah.
And as you said, I had the same experience. It gave you permission to follow that, because maybe due to, a lack of confidence or self-worth or whatever conditioning that you had in life, that this was a different path, but it really rung true for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Taking a little pause here to bring you a message from one of our sponsors today. If you're listening to Durga and you're getting inspired to study Ayurveda online and get certified, check out Kerala Ayurveda Academy's beginner programs, which offer comprehensive foundation in Ayurvedic principles and lifestyle tools, including simple personalized yoga practices that you can use at home and for your clients. Now, it's not too late to join the spring session, and programs start every fall and spring. Learn more at keralaayurveda.us/courses. And for $100 off tuition, use the reference code Elements100 when you join a first level certification. And you can find all those details in the show notes. Okay, let's go back to my conversation with Durga. One of the pieces I read in one of your articles, I saw a quote from Dr. Hari Krishnan about the fact that addiction occurs when we lose purpose in our life. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that, because it is along the lines of what you're saying, that you sought out this path of security, the corporate job. I've definitely been there too, working in banking, and that was the secure path and so on. And, the normal path, but it didn't resonate with you. You were living a lifestyle that was destructive for you. And now you found this true calling, this true purpose. So I can speak a little bit about that, how addiction occurs when we lose our purpose in life.
Yeah, that's a big topic. So I hope I can cover an aspect of that. And I think today I feel inclined to draw it towards this, and it's a big conversation that we're having in the holistic field, say, where we have a stress reaction. And so most of us, having lost connection with our inner core essential self, are kind of living the conditioning, and we're beginning to recognize how skewed that conditioning is. You mentioned who you can be as a female, like who you can be, like for me, my own religion and my nationality gave me certain obstacles in life. But you kind of don't know that living in your own system, but then your own system can also be problematic in the sense of intergenerational trauma and active addiction. And I can say abandonment because my father died when I was 5. And so it's not willful abandonment. I'm not sure any abandonment ever really is. So one of the things that always helped me was in early recovery, a friend came and said, everybody's doing the best they can with what they have. And I remember doing a double take to really try and digest that statement. Like, really? Because surely we should all be doing a little better. And I think I like these days, everybody's doing the best they can with the level of consciousness that they're at.
There you go. Yeah.
And I think post-war, in my family, we're post-war people. My grandfather had lost his brothers in the war. My mother had been evacuated from the city out to the country because of the bombing that was going on. So there was this traumatic loss, but traumatic loss is very often dealt with by very active building. So getting our material stuff back in place. Right. You come from the same area of the world. So yes. When you've been bombed and when you've had men lost in war, you rebuild as strongly as you can. But there was that post-war emphasis on materiality, get all these things in place. And if you're materially okay, you have a house and you have a job, and that's where our society moved into paternalized protection and care for us.
Yes, very true. Yeah. And the security of having a home was very high in our culture. Yeah.
Yeah. And that really was a big one for me. And so my first job was giving mortgages to the stockbrokers beside the London Stock Exchange, and then living through financial crashes. I mean, I'm not that old and I've lived through 3 of them. So it's a promise at a material level of security that no one can deliver. And so we can spend a lot of energy trying to get there and nothing feels stable. And so that part of our emotional pain, part of our psychological pain is to live within a system where I think maybe our aspiration is towards this material gain and affluence and security, and yet it is very unstable. We know that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the capitalist system, right? It's the material wealth, the acquiring material stuff and property and so on. But as you said earlier, it's leaving a hole in our soul.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think, really, I don't even know if I'm answering the question that you specifically asked.
What you're sharing is wonderful. Keep going.
I think like having turned into like the 21st century now, that there, with the rise of the Eastern philosophy meeting, like the Western philosophy, then there is this emerging philosophy that we have to like curtail our need for the material security. So of course we need it. We need to know that we have house and that we have food and those material needs are met. But we also need to develop our psychology and our emotional intelligence and our spiritual nature and our spiritual awareness if we're to solve some of these like world problems that are actually like community problems, that are family system problems, that are internal embodied problems, the pandemics that we see. And yes, there's a pandemic regarding COVID, but there was a pandemic regarding drug addiction before that. Mm-hmm. And the other pandemic that's coming is related to food companies believing that like drug solutions are more cost effective than actual animal hygiene. So, we have these animals that are overfed antibiotics and we're getting the resistant bacteria strains. Yeah. So these are issues that we're going to have to face. Mm-hmm. And there's an aspect, and my teacher, Dr. Ramkumar, often mentions this. Are you dealing with your own need or are you dealing with the greed?
Yes,
and
very good.
There is this consumer society that offers us many beautiful things that we can have for a level of need.
Yeah.
But then that's all they've got. So then they keep like ramping that up and they give us some luxury. They give us some aspirational belonging to a brand like Nike. Like I am someone because I wear Nike.
Yes.
And so like we're developing that need into a greed level.
Yeah.
And that is the addictive cycle in play. Like, give me more. And Deepak Chopra says a definition of addiction is when more is never enough. Mm-hmm. And that's the consumer model working on us. We have the opportunity now with the Eastern philosophy being part of many people's lives to bring that into a multi-layered solution to what we really need in our life.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, this structure that we've had where it's about getting the most, whether it's getting the most from people in factory settings, whether it's getting the most from animals in factory farms or abusing natural resources for our own use. It's all about stripping things to the core, which is that greed. We just want more and more and more rather than living in harmony with nature and in harmony with each other. And that's the issue right now. We've just been using and abusing for our need for more and more and more, for greed, right?
Yeah. And I do love generally the Ayurveda perspective, as above, so below. Mm-hmm. So everything that we're seeing playing out on an individual level, we also need to look to the macro level and see how it's playing out there. Yeah. And I think it's a travesty how much we have emphasized that the addict needs to get well, this them and us situation, that, the addict has succumbed to some kind of hedonistic or like ultimate greed, and it's kind of shameful and it's stigmatized. But at the same level, the biggest message we receive as, really people who have been, I think we have been identified more as consumers than citizens of this world. And so we're told to consume everything. Like if you see the change in our language, We have the media system where, the Netflix binge is just part of a weekend.
Yeah.
But binge used to be a word that indicated, pretty severe psychological distress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. I know.
So we've normalized addiction and stigmatized it at the same time, but there's money to be made from it. And that's another disappointing thing.
It's just all about disconnection from our true nature, disconnection from Mother Nature. And it's all about, reconnecting with our true self, which is when you found Ayurveda, you already were on the path of yoga. And then when you found Ayurveda and connecting to your true nature and bringing yourself into balance. And you talked about in one of your articles how, it's increasing Sattva, right? The guna of Sattva in your life. Yeah. And you talked about one of your favorite classes, one day at a time class. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, because that's all about connecting more to nature, connecting to your true nature and increasing Sattva, increasing that balance in life.
Yeah. So how can I go into that? It's another quite lengthy topic, but the main thing to understand, I think, about we as humans is, let's say Sattva is present moment awareness, that we are able to respond to the situation that we find ourselves in this moment. And we can do that from the felt sense of what's going on now. And there's a clarity of mind with Sattva, whereas most of us can reach states like that, but we cannot maintain it. And so what we're really trying to do is we're trying to come up with the best solution possible for the myriad issues and problems and trials and tests that we're dealing with, but from the Rajasic mind. And the Rajasic mind is the one that projects. It also is the one that fixes and solves problems because it recognizes this is a problem. So in that core essential nature, this is just the transient event that's, occurring and will pass and will continuously pass because everything is changing. The Rajasic mind tries to exert some kind of control on what is generally impermanent. And it tries to reach a kind of level of security and perfection of attaining something at the level of change. So we are trying to make permanent and make perfect that which is impermanent and imperfect. And there is the understanding from a deep psychological system like yoga that the reason we do that is because there is fundamentally an inherent remembrance of what is permanent and perfect within us, our true nature. But we externalize that mission. And so what that does in our conversation is we then go about, dealing with the externals in a particular way. So in a summary type of thing, in activated rajas, you do have hyperactivation of the chemicals within the actual physical system, but there's the mindset that goes with each of the doshas. So the vata dosha has that kind of overthinking, worrying, anxiety, and multitasking, because to do more means to be more safe, to be more accepted and loved. Whereas the pitta takes that same environment and it definitely intensifies, it moves towards what would be, and I have to say that the conversation around the stress reaction is coming from the mammal nature. So the fight mode, fighting to be right. The fighting to get other people to do it your way, in that sense of, I know how this is how it should be done. So they get intense, they get controlling, they get hard to be around. They kind of exhaust themselves with trying to control the external environment. And then there's that aspect of anger that arises with them. And then the kapha dosha, which is on a material level, it is the more substantial aspect of our body system. And we all have the kapha dosha, but that is just more withdrawing, not wanting to be into, physically, it's not really ready to flight or fight. And so there's an aspect of attachment with Kapha. There's an aspect of just, they are the least happy to embrace change. So they want things to stay the same. And then in Yoga of Recovery, we have found that the reaction to that is better termed as tend and befriend. And this goes a long way into conversation that these habits, this, and your word, conditioning, they're going on since the moment we arrive, and they're going on within families and communities that are really, they are conditioned by great systems of stress and control. So a child cannot fly away from their home. They might be frightened, the Vata aspect, the nervous system, but they can't actually leave home, and nor can they fight. They can't really take up arms against the other family members. You can see that in their nature, but I think really at the embodied level of existence, then what we have is a tend and befriend. We have to placate even the belief systems that we live in. So for us, we were talking about it with adolescents in a mentorship conversation that I was having the other day, and like how the youth have to fit in or create a facade to be part of, to be accepted, to be okay within the system, but ultimately knowing that it's not really true to their felt sense of who they are at an identity level. Yes. And I think we're seeing that change. We have more fluidity around genders and sexual preferences and things, but hopefully we won't lose that into more variety and diversity. But there is this aspect of us, and tend and befriend to us is just really, it's the root of codependency. It's like me extending my energy and efforts in life to make sure you're okay. So it's almost the opposite of the spiritual path, like self-realization. It's attention given to the other, that if I can make you okay, I'll be okay. So I think that's something that we're missing. And when it comes to the conversation, especially on the stress reactions, then, we drop down into freeze mode. And freeze mode, at the animal level is, yes, you're going to play dead, you're going to fawn, that type of thing. But really what it is within the human mode is that it's like it freezes these limiting beliefs in place, and we operate only from there. So it's like a really closed loop cycle that we all live in. So on that macro level, I just think it's fascinating that we're breaking out of that a little bit. Like, who said that it should be like this? And we're starting to like dig a little deeper the way we would, like, what is the root of this problem? And we begin to see just, the genocide and things that the land ownership and the control of the finances has been built on. And so then we're beginning to question that. And all of that involves these macro level addictions that we're living in, So it's just the addiction thing has always been a very important spiritual question. And it's all really quite interesting that it's a question that the Western medical model has not really been able to provide a solution for. And they really haven't, because the addiction problem gets worse and worse, and no solution is offered. Apart from now, when we call it a brain disease, then there's more and more of a proposed solution that there's a pharmaceutical that can repair the chemicals of the brain. And that is a big step, and it's a good first base call for what is a physical and disease-based medicine model. But people who actually experience the addictive issues in their life, they need something deeper than that, just like I did. That's what brought me to this work. That's what brought me to form the Yoga of Recovery. And how did I form the Yoga of Recovery? From my own need. And then I approached people that had a deeper view of what health and life and purpose and meaning was about. And the biggest part was when I put up my little shingle saying Yoga of Recovery, people came. I was dealing with a not a very well-known healing science, Ayurveda. Most people didn't know what it was. And also I was part of an anonymous group of people. And I didn't have a marketing budget for my work. And yet Yoga of Recovery was built because the people will gather where there is sense and where there's resonance about a conversation, about a really lived experience in this moment of time. And so that is the Sattva. The Sattva is when the people get together, and it's in the satsanga, that when we're no longer swallowing the party line that we're given by multi-million-dollar corporations and enterprises, and we start to tribally get involved with our own lived solution within community, within family. And we stop stigmatizing and isolating people that they don't measure up to this normal.
Yes. Yeah.
I had a big ambition to be normal when I first got into recovery, and people came up to me and kind of said, "Can you drop that idea?" It's not that helpful. I think normal to me is consumer conformity. We're fitting into this reckless and almost cruel model of limiting beliefs that has been offered to us.
Right, which is why we're seeing so much suffering in our world. Because people are saying this system isn't working, and they're so consumed by the system that it's hard to see outside these boxes that we're in, which is where yoga and Ayurveda come into play, because it's really a stripping away of all those external conditionings, and first of all getting to know your true nature, and from there building up lifestyle practices, self-care practices, mindfulness, present moment awareness, so that you can have this awareness of where you are and what is your true nature and what you want to bring in the world. So it's really stripping away all that conditioning, right?
Yeah. And I think it is that we are asking people to engage in, not the passive solution, a pill for every ill, but we're asking people to kind of step up and face their freedom, face their life choices, and face their actual embodied power and bring it to the forefront, and that it's arousing. It's almost like a rebellion. It's like a revolution. If we want it to happen, it's going to happen within each of us. And it happens every time you open your eyes in the morning, going back to this one day at a time type of thing, that with the circadian rhythms, with the whole rhythmic living through the stages of life and things, that we have this opportunity. We don't have to plan out a whole lifetime. We just have to revolutionize our view of our own self and live this one day better, and not better to live up to someone else's ideals or to pacify someone's anger or expectation of us, but to live more true to who we are. And I think all of us have some innate recognition of some kind of calling, we have some attraction and draw towards something that makes us, makes us feel uplifted. It makes our heart sing. We do it if we weren't being paid to do it, type of thing.
Yes, exactly.
So that piece, it's the Dharma piece. It's the being true to your unique self, as you said, the Sattva piece, letting it shine through. And we really kind of have to, say no to guilt and say no to shame and stigmatizing people for the actual suffering that they're in, especially when so many people are making so much money from the suffering. You wonder why it doesn't end. Well, it's part of the consumer machine.
It's so true.
And I think the ones that have made their money and their power in the illusion and the delusion and the darkness and the projection of the Rajas and Tamas, that will be revealed, and we'll stop subscribing. So hit unsubscribe and, find your tribe, find someone that's having a conversation that supports that inner uplifting feeling of empowerment that somewhere lives within you, and then walk on that every day. And when you can't, take someone's hand or lean on them, because some days someone is stronger than us and other days we are stronger than someone else. And so that chain of like the ripple effect of healing, we need to participate in that.
Yes.
Rather than listen to this constant pathological description of who I am and how you're going to fix me and how much it's going to cost.
Right. And it's that separation from your own healing. Whereas with Ayurveda and yoga, you're an integral part of it and you're doing it. And it gives, it empowers you and gives you confidence that you have, control over your own healthcare.
Yeah. And in saying that, Colette, I need help from others.
Yes.
I constantly, from my fellowship, from the Yoga Recovery Sangha, from the Sangha of the beautiful teachers, people like yourself that are like having these conversations. And a big one for me, we mentioned Dr. Hare Krishna, that a large part of my primary healthcare is to go, and I actually go to India and I take panchakarma. Like I have to clean out the pipes. I was just away in Ireland and England for a month, and I came home and my chimney was blocked and my house pipes were blocked. And I thought, isn't that so Ayurveda that without proper use, the flow through the channels?
Right, exactly.
Then, the chimney was probably overused because it's been a cold winter and we've been home for a lot of it because of the COVID stuff. But the pipes were without the proper flow of the water. Then we had to get the professionals in.
Micro and macro.
Exactly. And I think it's a big thing for people with addictive natures to be able to accept care. And that's the word we use in recovery, yoga recovery in particular. We are about sharing the care of the system, body, mind system, rather than just pursuing this ultimate cure of getting us back to normal and getting us producing within the consumer capital model again.
Yeah. And it's a very good point you raised, Durga, about we very much in the West, it's a very much focus on individualism and an individualistic society. And I think that has caused a big separation too. And like you said, the fact of accepting support and collaborating with others and having community. And as you said, your tribe, that's so important as we go forward, because this journey, it can, especially if you're going through the journey of recovery, that it can be a lonely journey because you're really going through a lot of change. So having that support system around you is so important.
Yeah. And that is probably the fundamental mistake that we make. And to me, this is ultimately the tamas, is that we try not to admit that we have the problem. And the problem doesn't have to be towards alcohol. It might be the way you engage in, resolving your own loneliness through relationships with people. That might be sexual. It might just be like codependent, just giving all your energy and care and attention into someone else who doesn't respect or love you. You don't get anything back from it. It's so the whole idea of like we kind of fold into ourselves and we withdraw a little from society. We get a little secretive about our suffering and we don't want to share it with anybody. So even as we embark on healing, a lot of us have what we call self-initiated cessation attempts, but we're not sharing what we're trying to do. We're showing up in a yoga class, we're showing up at some kind of retreat, but we're not going to admit that we're struggling.
Yeah.
And that's the tamas hold, because that's a sort of insanity. Why wouldn't you be struggling in this world? It's very fragmented and fractious now. And so like we are conditioned into believing this is the only thing we have. So the fundamental aspect of reaching out for help today is sit with the idea that it really is so much more difficult trying to do it alone. Admit to someone you're struggling with it, and then just have the idea of acceptance of where you are, ask for help and accept the help that comes. So it's not all rehab, go into your yoga class or show up on some kind of Zoom online session, whether it's a recovery meeting, whether it's a yoga class, buy a book, but engage and accept that as soon as you welcome it, there's some kind of help making its way towards you.
Yeah. And the relief, once you have that, you open up, and that vulnerability, there's such a relief with that. It's like a letting go.
And I think just really, if I speak from experience, it was relief to finally be seen, because when you're not showing up for who you are, how does anybody have a chance to love and accept you?
Exactly.
Because they never see you.
Right. Yes.
And that's a really uncomfortable place for everyone to be, because you kind of feel that, like, why won't this person let me in, kind of thing. And I don't want to be let in thinking that I'm going to solve your problems, but I think there is so much worth in you that I want to be allowed to see it. And that's like warts and faults and all, like that is part of your story, and it has a lot to teach me and others.
Yeah. And the more vulnerable we are, the more connection we have. The more we break down those walls that we think are protecting us, but they're really keeping us isolated. So the more we are vulnerable and open up and let those walls down, the more connection we'll feel, and the more truer relationships we'll have. Yeah,
it's so true. Yeah. We use this term, like the she factor, that we're sort of, I think Ayurveda brings in the feminine power more, and the she is the shared human experience. That it's not unique what we're going through. You know, what we're going through has been gone through by many others, and like that aspect of sharing, isn't it? A problem shared is a problem halved, kind of thing. It's a very old saying from my country, and it's definitely true.
I love that she experienced shared human experience. Absolutely. Well, Durga, I could speak forever with you. This has been a great conversation, and I'd love to have you back. I feel like there's so much more we need to discuss.
Yes. And I could absolutely converse with you forever too. And, you know, Ayurveda gives us this whole universal connection with the elements, but there's always something to talking to someone that has the lilt of your own accent.
Yes. I definitely feel that. And a similar background, growing up in a similar background as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I've just been in Ireland, so I think some of my rebellious nature is to the forefront now. Like, let's reclaim our sanity and our serenity and stop selling it down the Swanee with like just this like glamorous solution that's being offered to us for something that like we really are not generally.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely feel I've got that rebellious nature too. I definitely feel you on that. Durga, before we finish up, I'd love for you to tell people where they can find out more about you, your book, which you just published just now, right? Just this month is published. Is that correct?
Yes, it's being released on the 19th of May. 2022, and it is a first book. It's not that this first book has taken 20 years to birth.
Wow! And congratulations.
You'll find everything about what I do. I think probably right now it's good to find me on Instagram, Yoga of Recovery. I'm also there on Facebook, Yoga of Recovery, because my good friend and assistant Tarini does more of the updating and posting there. There's a website, yogaofrecovery.com. Great. I would love for you to email me if you've got anything to contribute, especially if you read the book. And my email is Durga, Durga, A for Apple, at yogaofrecovery.com.
Great. And I'll put all those links in the show notes. And you have all your offerings on the website as well, the courses and so on, and where you're speaking.
Yeah. And let me say this, after all these years of like kind of having probably too much barrier to entry, like I have taught in ashrams and, 5, 7, and 10 days. We've started a second Saturday, so you can just join us on Zoom, and it's a brief sharing, discussion and practice around some of the yoga of recovery perspectives. So that's the second Saturday every month, 8 to 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. Okay. And then also that hopefully will between that and the book, then you'll get a feeling of whether coming on board for an online session is something that would help you in your healing pathway and also bring you towards joyous satsanga. And the next one I'm starting for that goes live on the 28th of May. And we run these for, generally 10 to 12 weeks or so. Okay. So if you're interested in that, then have a look. And hopefully the book will offer a way to share this conversation more widely. And I'm really interested to hear back from people. I know how much it's helped me. I know how much it's helped other people. And I'm very curious to see what helps you when you read the book.
Well, you're certainly going to help a lot of people. I think addiction comes in many forms, as you said. And I think this using Ayurveda and yoga as a part of the recovery program is just fantastic. I love that you're doing that. And I think it's, like I said, it's going to help many people. So it's going to resonate with lots of people out there. So Durga, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation today and for all the work you're doing in the world. I love that you're taking all your experiences in life and bringing them now into your Dharma is what it's all about, right?
Yeah, it gives me a career that is priceless. It's just the people that I meet and the life that I have, I couldn't have imagined.
Beautiful.
So the Dharma is so rewarding.
Yeah.
And thank you, Colette. Also, I looked at your website and all your podcasts. An amazing resource you've created and just generously shared. I'm very impressed, and I got to go back and listen to a few more.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, yeah, we're passionate about the work we do, so it's it makes it a lot easier, right? When you're living your Dharma and you're very passionate about your work. So, Durga, thank you so much, and I'd love to have you back. Come back and say hello to us again, because I feel like there's lots more that we can discuss.
Absolutely, I'd love to.
Thank you, Durga. Take care for now, and we'll chat again soon.
Namaste.
Namaste. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Durga, and please check out the show notes for all the links mentioned in this episode. If you think this episode will be helpful to family or friends, I would appreciate it if you could share it with them so we can get this wisdom out there. And if you haven't already followed or subscribed to the podcast, please do so wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you would like to rate and review the podcast, I would really appreciate that. You can also check out my online services, consultations, at-home cleanses, and educational programs on elementshealingandwellbeing.com. I'm also on social media, Instagram and Facebook under Elements Healing and Wellbeing. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.